I'm Deanna Flay-Hive, the Director of Capitol Hill United Ministries and the Women's Homelessness Initiative. And Capitol Hill United Ministries is a consortium of faith-based agencies and congregations that have been around for over 30 years. And what we do is offer an opportunity for collegiality as a community, for advocacy for the areas that we know people need to be seen and heard and witnessed and worked with. Also, we're a place of spiritual presence and education to our community. And for the last 9 years, WHI has had the opportunity to walk with our women who are homeless through offering a wonderful place for them to stay in our churches for the last 9 years. 70,000 cots filled with women who have found sanctuary and care and witness. So COVID has changed what we've done, and we're doing a variety of other things along with offering sanctuary. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce to you our awesome virtual wizard. Where is Sonia?
I'm here, Deanna.
There you are. Hello. And Sonia will take controls, so you better watch out what you say and do. She'll just mute you really quickly.
Right.
You'll already be muted, actually. And she's going to give a little update on how we're going to do this electronically.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you all for being with us today. It's great to see so many friends gathered. And John, thank you for being with us today. But let me extend to everyone these words of warning. John is very kind and exceedingly personable, a very warm soul indeed.
Oh, no.
You can see it all in his many books, all very engaging and instructive, but in every case, very challenging. He'll slip up on us, make us feel welcomed and valued, and then extend as great a challenge for peace as ever we could imagine. And let me add, a really good example of that is his October podcast on Dorothy Day. Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to listen. Thanks, John. We welcome your words.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for having me. And hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well out there, wherever you are. Is it snowing in Denver today? Do you have 20 feet of snow?
Not today.
Do you have snow on the ground? Because Taos had 2 feet yesterday. Did you know that? Northern New Mexico.
No.
So you lucked out. I used to live in New Mexico for 20 years, but I'm now in Big Sur, California, and it's about 70 out here. I'm right on the ocean, and the Wi-Fi phone doesn't work where I live, so I'm in the nearby church in a classroom, but I brought a nice picture of Dr. King here. And anyway, thank you for having me, and Deanna, thank you for telling me about CHUM. That just sounds fantastic. And so Mark had originally, I don't even remember, Mark, but I vaguely remember you said this came up because of the concerns about the election.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm happy. I just love to talk about nonviolence and Jesus and how we're doing that. And that's what I want to talk about. But I don't know, by chance, I heard All Things Considered this morning on NPR. I don't know if any of you heard it. And their mainstream national radio, they said, a lot of people around the country are planning for a coup to happen next week. And I think that was in effect why Mark asked me to be on here to talk about that and what that means for us. And that's very powerful that it's right there on NPR. I'm not sure that'll happen, but I think one thing that I would hope that we could talk about today is what are we going to do? And you already have, Deanna, this great organization. And I'd invite everybody to be thinking as I'm reflecting with you that you could do so. I think you should have a meeting on Sunday afternoon and plan something in person in one of your churches. They said it's interesting. You might all go and listen to the NPR report this morning. Just go online and listen to it. They interviewed, you know, a lot of good activists, and there's lots happening around the country in terms of organizing. But then they went to some Quaker church, maybe in Pennsylvania, and they were doing everything right. And they said, we think Trump is going to declare victory before the votes are in. Well, that's called a coup. We think he may not step down. That's a coup. Or people are going to, all kinds of people are going to get to the streets, and there could very well be violence. Well, I'm going to, Diana, you use the word spiritual presence, and you're telling me you're in Capitol Hill. You're right near the Capitol. I'm sorry, but you've got an assignment there for you. You all are going to have to be a kind of a nonviolent spiritual presence in Denver, I think, on Tuesday and Wednesday. I think you've got, that's what I want to invite you to consider, and I'm happy to talk about it with you. But it was very interesting. The Quaker Church this morning said they've divided the church into affinity groups. So everybody's prepared. Everybody's got signs. They've all trained in nonviolence, and they're going to go from the church, if necessary, to be out on the streets. And that's the Christian nonviolent response. That's a Pentecost kind of action. We want to be real nonviolent people and be that spiritual presence, peacemakers. We want to keep Denver calm. Hopefully this doesn't have to happen, but it's all good training in following Jesus anyway. So with that as a kind of a, you know, just to address this incredible moment we're living through, the pandemic, the world, and to even hear the word coup on NPR this morning. Never happened before in our lifetimes. And this is very serious. And if Trump says, I'm the winner, you know, that is not democracy. And there's no results. So they had on this great expert, by the way, who studied all the coups. And you can look all this up at my group, wagingnonviolence.org. Great group, has a lot of information about what to do. The main group nationally that's organizing what to do in case things are really bad, I think is called choose.democracy@us.com. You can look up Choose Democracy, something like that. I'm having a senior moment, but you can find it on Waging Nonviolence too. But they said historically, the only way to address this is it has to happen immediately. That was the first thing the guy said on NPR, and that's true historically. If it's not addressed immediately, that things drag on for months. So everybody has to take to the streets if something bad happens Tuesday night. And I think you all, because you already have a network, you already know each other, and you are in a very important city in the United States. I'm sorry, but you got your work cut out for you, Deanna. And you're right there at the Capitol, and I'm pointing at you, so not Mark. Hey, you're muted. You can't say anything either. You can't respond. You may just have to agree with me. So I brought my.
Oh yes, I can. And I always will.
I brought my picture of my hero, Dr. King, and I want to just step back from my little part and just talk about nonviolence in general. Because to me, we can never get enough about it. And my invitation is all of you in all the different churches in Denver to be talking about nonviolence for the next year like never before, especially in this time of pandemic, because it's actually an opportunity for us to deepen our Christianity. Anyway, it's not, you can't see it because of the glare, but the night before he was killed, Martin said, as you remember, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence. That's not what we're talking about. It's not violence or nonviolence. These are Martin Luther King's last public words. We're not talking about violence or nonviolence. It's nonviolence or non-existence. The world will destroy, we will destroy ourselves unless we all become people of nonviolence. And that's where we are today, 52 years after he said that. Totally moving toward non-existence. And I invite us, especially as CHUM in this important city, your ministry, you're to be the leaven in Colorado to help everybody in Colorado step back from the brink of non-existence and become the people of nonviolence that Dr. King calls us to. That has not happened yet. This is the most important work of our lives in one of the scariest moments of our lives. Do I have to talk about the pandemic of violence? Just to name it. I mean, we now live in a world of permanent war. Our country is at permanent war, you know, and there's military bases all over Colorado. And the birthplace of the atomic bomb is right down the road from you in Los Alamos. It's your backyard. We are closer to nuclear war than ever. And in this whole spectrum of a culture of violence, we have just unparalleled systemic racism right now happening in ways that we haven't seen before, of hate groups and police brutality and mass incarceration, the numbers that are unbelievable. You all know this. I'm just talking about what we are up against. This in corporate greed and Wall Street ruling the world, you know, a handful of billionaires with over half the world's money, with homelessness in Denver, and 4 billion people in subhuman conditions without clean water, food, housing, healthcare, jobs, you know, education, dignity, and just a culture of violence beyond our comprehension. You know, torture and executions, but you know, what's on my mind morning, noon, and night is catastrophic climate change. And last fall, before the pandemic hit, I got really involved with Jane Fonda's group, Fire Drill Fridays. They're fantastic. And she does this Friday Zoom call, which is now approaching 1 million people. She's bringing on the best environmentalists. I think you should all listen to it on Facebook. We have till 2030, that's the high end of optimism from the United Nations, to stop all digging up fossil fuels. After that, it's really uncontrollable, Earth out of control, where we're talking 100 years from now, hundreds and hundreds of wars. You know, 1 billion people becoming refugees and so forth and so on. So it's that's why I think Dr. King was right and why I'm so passionate about nonviolence. So, you know, this time is so strange. Mark, wasn't I coming out to see you, coming to speak in your church? And like 2 days before the pandemic hit, and I remember once Tom Hanks got it, like the whole country shut down because if he can get it. And I was going to talk about my new book, Praise Be Peace, the Psalms. But I've been home ever since. And but I've been trying to use the time as a deepening of nonviolence and in all my ways. And that's what I wanted to invite you all to do with this conversation, and deepening your community's nonviolence and deepening your preparations for Tuesday, and maybe thinking about how can you help Denver become a nonviolent city? That's a project I've been working on. I think that would be very cool for you all to work on because you're there at the Capitol. One of the things that we know is that violence doesn't work and war doesn't work. It's just all of this insanity is bringing us closer to non-existence and a culture of destruction. But nonviolence really does work. And that's why I stay with this clumsy word that Gandhi and Dr. King uses. And my question for all of you, especially the church people, is how do you define it? And I invite you to define it and talk about it with your congregations. First of all, that word. When I was the head of FOR, we always spoke of, that's the Fellowship of Reconciliation. We called it active nonviolence. And you can talk about love. We all love love. I love my car. You see my point. And at Los Alamos, they use the word peace morning, noon, and night. They also do that at Colorado Springs. The word peace doesn't work anymore. Nobody uses the word nonviolence, so that's a word church people can get away with. And that's why I bite it. I think it's a vision of the heart that sees every human being on the planet as your very sister and brother. This is the bottom line truth of reality, that we're all one, all reconciled, already united. The gift of peace is already given to us. And the deeper you go into the spiritual truth of reality of our common unity, the more you widen it. Every human being is your sister and brother. No, you're the creatures, Mother Earth, the universe, we're all one. It's so spectacular. You can never hurt anybody ever again, much less sit back while there's 30 wars happening, 15,000 nuclear weapons, billions of people dying in poverty and suffering in poverty, and the earth headed toward catastrophic climate change like we don't even know. So there's nothing passive about this, and we have to go way beyond Dr. King and Gandhi and nonviolence. So my big message, I think, is during this pandemic, every one of us has to deepen our nonviolence and step up to the plate in a way we never envisioned we'd have to in our lives. We all have to become really mature disciples and apostles of Christian nonviolence in this terrible hour. And this is a great blessing if we dare choose to do that. That means we are going to be people who pursue the truth of our common unity, who reconcile every human being we meet in Denver. That's what you're doing at CHUM, especially with the homeless women. And you stand up publicly and you're going to nonviolently resist every structure of violence, from racism to greed to war to nukes to these terrible destructive policies on the earth. You can allow God to disarm our hearts of the violence within us so that we're part of God's peace movement, God's disarming love. I can go on and on here. I'm trying to define it. We practice unconditional, nonviolent, universal, all-inclusive, non-retaliatory, sacrificial, universal love. You see, I've been drinking too much coffee. But Mark, there's one catch, and Sonia and Deanna, and this is where you're all going to get off the Zoom call. From now on, there is no cause, however noble, no matter what anyone says, which you or I will ever again support taking of a single human life. We don't kill people. We don't support the killing of people. We don't kill people who kill people to show that killing is wrong, like the death penalty. And we give our lives to stop the hurting and the killing of people. That's a stupid way of putting our Christian mission. I love the poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. Remember that? She was a great resister 100 years ago. She has this line, "I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death." What we're talking about is death. That's what my friend and teacher Daniel Berrigan told me throughout his whole life. We are up against the forces of death, and we're trying to say no to death and yes to life. So for me, I mean, there's so many ways to look at nonviolence as a way of life. It's a tactic and a strategy of social change. It's a political methodology of organizing towards positive nonviolent change that always works if you use it. Now know that. But if Martin Luther King were here, he'd say, no, John doesn't understand nonviolence at all. He defined nonviolence as power. Isn't that fantastic? Because he says, you think we are told by the culture of violence that we are powerless. There's nothing you can do in Denver. You cannot make a difference. You can't get Trump to leave nonviolently. You can't get rid of nuclear weapons, and you can't stop all the digging up of the fossil fuels. And Martin says, no, we have a power, and Jesus used that word in Luke 10 as well. You have been given power. And that's very helpful. So all of these things to ponder. So a couple years ago, if you're still hanging in here with me, I wrote this book, which I wanted to talk about a little bit. I don't know if you can see, it's called The Nonviolent Life. And there because I've been thinking about it for so long, I have this theory about nonviolence that I want to pitch to you. And this is especially for your communities to talk about, and a way to help teach this in a simple framework for your people in Denver, which is a very important place. You have a very important vocation. So here's the thing. This way of life and a way of resistance requires 3 simultaneous attributes, okay? You got to do all 3. You can't just do 1 and you can't do 2. You got to do all 3 to reach the holistic nonviolence of our teacher, Dr. King. Okay, you with me? No? Okay, number 1, and this is what we're trying to teach in your sermons and your ministries, to all 3 of these, to your people. 1, from now on, everybody's got to be totally nonviolent to themselves. Number 2, at the same time, everybody from now on has to practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward everyone in Denver and every human being on the planet and all the creatures and Mother Earth. That's number 2. Number 3, you also have to have 1 foot in the global grassroots movement of nonviolence. I just want to say a word about each one of them. See, the reason I'm putting it like that is we're really good maybe at 1 of those. Some of us might be good at 2 of those, but very few reach Martin's level of all 3. This holistic nonviolence. And if the situation is as bad as we all know it is, we've all got to step up to the plate like Martin Luther King and Jesus. So this country is very, very, very sick. We are a very sick people, and church people are very sick. We're continuing it by we are part of the problem. We are supporting the culture of violence and spreading violence by not teaching nonviolence and by being silent. So we have to start from scratch again. And the first thing is help people to become nonviolent to themselves, especially young people. Now, I can talk about this at length, and the Dalai Lama talks a lot about this, how sick Americans are, because it's not a problem in a lot of other places around the world. That's why I'm talking like this. In Nepal, for example, they can't imagine that people would not feel love for themselves. So we need to teach people not to beat themselves up, not to cultivate violence inside themselves or put themselves down out of their self-hatred, let go of their self-esteem. In fact, let go of, and through their prayer and contemplation, let go of all anger, resentment, hurt, wounds, bitterness, all the roots of violence in ourselves, and teach people to start cultivating interior nonviolence, to make peace with themselves. It's very hard and very beautiful and very healing to practice, as Pema Chodron calls it, unconditional friendliness to yourself. I mean, I'm trying to say, on Wednesday, you may need to be out on the streets in front of the Capitol. But this is the problem. You're going to get out there, and if you're not doing your inner nonviolence work, someone's going to come up to you, either the cops or the opposite side, a pro-Trump, and be provocative to you, and it can trigger you, and you can respond violently. Or just be mean and violent and not your centered, mindful self. And that's, you could be responding the way you were when you were 5 years old or 10 years old. That's why the inner work of nonviolence is critically important for people engaging in public active nonviolence, okay? And you and I are supposed to be teachers of this and practitioners of this. And Dr. King was an expert on it. This is what I'm trying to teach you. So if you do have a session like Sunday, make sure everybody, they have to be like Gandhi when you get out there. I'm serious. Totally mindful, totally nonviolent, in their best space, done a lot of meditation, really good to go, and going to respond nonviolently. Okay, while you're doing your inner work, at the same time, you want to practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being you know and in all your relationships. Nonviolence to your spouse, nonviolence to your children, nonviolence to your parents, nonviolence to your neighbors. I always joke, nonviolence to everybody in the church. It's going to be rough, Deanna. It's going to be rough. Nonviolence to the Republicans or the Trump people you meet. Nonviolent toward everybody in the planet. And what about the creatures and Mother Earth? And you're all going, John, That's not a problem for us. We are devout peacemakers. And let me put it this way to you. Who's the one person who pushes all your buttons? You don't have to answer. Luckily, you're mute. Now, I bet you've got at least one person. It could be the president. It could be the Pope. It could be your mother or father. Maybe some of us have like 100 people and we're working on it. Those people who push your buttons are your teachers of nonviolence, because they expose all the violence in you. That's the shocking thing. And they're a blessing to you. And you get to practice nonviolence with them. You get to work and see, well, is Gandhi right? Is King right? Is Dorothy Day right? Is Jesus right? How do I love them? How do I live peacefully with them? And what's going on in me that they trigger me? Either there's some propensity in me toward just that personality. It's tapping into what happened to me when I'm 5, or they said something to you. Now you get to practice nonviolence. You're so lucky. And so all these people are people you're training all the time and becoming more and more nonviolent, more peaceful, more loving. And again, you're training so that you can be out on the streets as things get worse, and they're going to. But please also reflect on your nonviolence to the creatures as we're destroying the earth, and to Mother Earth. I wrote a whole book a couple of years ago called They Will Inherit the Earth on climate change. And I just want to say a word about it because it still shocks me. I mean, I've been teaching the Sermon on the Mount for 40 years, full time, and I never thought about this. In the 3rd sentence on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth." And I was writing a book on Thomas Merton, and Merton, I discovered, said, in 1965, the word meek means active nonviolence like Martin Luther King. He actually said that. There's nothing passive about it. It's active public nonviolence. So I'm thinking, what? And then I started to think that Jesus says people of active nonviolence inherit the earth. They're one with the earth. That's totally weird. How does this guy, Jesus, think this stuff up? And then I thought, I'm a teacher of this stuff, and I never thought about this. I know Daniel Berrigan never had his whole life, and I was stuck. Why? Because we don't teach nonviolence. And the church has rejected nonviolence in the year 300. For 1700 years, we threw out the Sermon on the Mount, and we have the so-called just war theory. Sometimes you just got to kill people. So instead of being people of nonviolence who are one with creation, we are people of violence. And so we're not one with Mother Earth. And so we're having catastrophic climate change. This is perfectly reasonable. Jesus explained all of this long ago, friends. You and I need to be people who connect the dots. As people of nonviolence, we got to work at getting back with one with Mother Earth. This is part of our nonviolence. Well, that's only the second thing. The third point is, while you're working on all of that, you've got to be involved in the movement. And I know you are, but we have to help build up the movements, support the movements, and encourage everyone we know to be part of the global grassroots movements of nonviolence. The only way positive social nonviolent change ever happens in history is bottom-up, people power, grassroots movements of nonviolence. From Jesus to Francis and Claire, to the abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the environmental movement, the women's movement. Now we know there are thousands of movements around the world. The world has never been more engaged as it's been in the last 50 years. There's actually a lot of hope going on. And the great scholar and expert of this is my friend Erica Chenoweth. The statistics she's reporting are incredible, how we now know that nonviolence actually does work. There have been 85 nonviolent revolutions around the world since 1970. Statistically, all violent revolutions fail. Violence in response to violence always leads to further violence. It literally cannot sow the seeds of a nonviolent future, of a nonviolent democracy. But unfortunately, if Martin is right, and we're all seeing it today, what we need right now is a global grassroots movement of nonviolence, the likes of which the world has never seen. And I know you'll forgive me for saying this, but I travel around full time and I lived in New Mexico for 20 years. I think Colorado's got work to do, friends. I do. I'm sorry. I know you all are good people and there's good works, but I would say the same thing in New Mexico and in Arizona. It's very hard to wake people up and get people out of their apathy, but we have to keep organizing. And Jesus was a nonviolent movement organizer. But the way I put it when I talk to people is, remember what Romero said? He said it the day he was killed. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everybody has to be involved in the grassroots movement. You can't do everything, so pick a cause. Now, Deanna's telling me a lot of you involved with homeless women. Great. Maybe some of you involved in the environmental movement. Great. Or the anti-war movement, like me. Or the anti-racism movement. Great. Just get involved and realize it's all one movement. Keep connecting the dots constantly. And, keep organizing, keep inviting people to do things. Now, I know you can get discouraged, but there's so much happening. Erica says 26 million people participated in Black Lives Matter this summer. This is the largest movement in the US history, and it's almost meticulously nonviolent. The Parkland kids have given me great hope. The way they organized after those killings against gun violence, the women marching during Trump's inauguration, all of this has to continue. Yes, Monday, 50 nations signed through the United Nations, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, new treaty. This was unthinkable 10 years ago. I've been really involved in that, been to Norway, I spoke at the launch of it. They are on track to abolish nuclear weapons. Even I find that hard to believe. The European activists are way more sophisticated than us. And they're much bigger visionaries and people of faith. They're working for it. And we need to learn from them. And you should all know about ICANN. There's very hopeful stuff is happening. We have to bring all of this stuff together as we prepare for next week. And what do we want to do for the rest of our lives in this moment, nonviolence or non-existence? My group was Campaign Nonviolence, and we have this project, Nonviolent Cities. You could all look it up at campaignonviolence.org. That's a concrete project you could do in Denver that CHUM could take on. And there's 25 cities working on it, and big ones too, like Wilmington, Cincinnati, St. Paul, Minneapolis, where you're involving the mayor and the city council, all the religious leaders, the police department, everybody, in helping your city envision itself as a nonviolent city, which means no shooting, no racism, no poverty, no supporting of war, no nuclear weapons nearby, and no destruction of the earth. It's very exciting. It was based on Carbondale, Illinois. That's what all the activists do there. You might be interested in that. Let me just add for the record, since I heard that you all were Christians. Is that true? Is that, yeah, you are? No, you're not. So you remember what Gandhi said? Mahatma Gandhi. He goes, Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. I love it. He's not even Christian, and he says that. And then the poor guy goes on and says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus was nonviolent are Christians. Was Jesus violent or nonviolent? If he's violent, I don't want to have anything to do with him. Who cares? Anybody can be violent. Forgive my language, but any idiot can kill somebody. Anybody can be violent. To be nonviolent is really hard and involves bravery and courage and faith. You don't need God if you've got guns and money and you're a person of violence. Who cares? You don't need God. But if you're nonviolent, you don't have a gun and you don't have any money and you don't trust in nuclear weapons, you need God. That's all you got, and each other, community. So Jesus comes along and practices this spectacular nonviolence, forms a community of nonviolence. You just touch the guy and you're healed because there's not a trace of violence in him. In his Sermon on the Mount is the greatest teachings of nonviolence in the history of the world, Gandhi said. Did you all know that Gandhi read from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life? Did you all know that? Do you all read from the Sermon on the Mount every single day? He's not even Christian. Isn't that shocking? I invite you to start doing that. He was so mesmerized by the fifth antithesis. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, and the best translation of the Greek is, offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. You're not allowed, someone's going to do violence to you, you do not do violence back. The world says someone's coming to do violence to you, you have two responses. You can be violent back, use the means of the opponent, or you can run away and do nothing and be passive. Jesus offers, as Wink says, Walter Wink, a third alternative where you don't run away, you're not passive, you stand your ground, you engage your opponent through active nonviolence and say, hey, what's wrong? Don't hurt me. We're brothers and sisters, and you call each other back to the truth of our humanity, even to the point where you are willing to accept suffering without a trace of the desire to retaliate with further violence, until the scales fall from your opponent's eyes through your suffering love, and the situation is transformed. That's the methodology of the cross. That's how nonviolence works. And Gandhi kept interpreting Matthew 5 to see Jesus is saying we non-cooperate with violence, but that's not passivity. We actively non-violently resist it. And how are you doing that? How do you practice it? And then Jesus, I always joke, Jesus thinks he's Gandhi on the Salt March. He marches to Jerusalem in a total peaceful campaign. He goes into the temple, turns over the tables. He doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, or kill anybody, but he's not passive. He engages as active, nonviolent civil disobedience and says no more injustice. And if you do that, you're going to be arrested and tortured and killed. And that's what happened. And Gandhi's the greatest scripture scholar, in my opinion, because his teachings on the cross are incredible. He says Jesus goes deeper into nonviolence, forgiving everybody. And then Jesus comes back in the resurrection, and he's still meticulously nonviolent, very gentle, kind, makes these guys breakfast, which I always think is over the top with the nonviolence Jesus, and says, okay, now peace be with you. Now you go and walk the road of nonviolence to your own Jerusalem. You don't have to go to Jerusalem or DC. Denver is your Jerusalem. And that seems to me your vocation. So I can go on for several more hours, but I'll sum it up. Maybe 4 points. We have to be first contemplatives of nonviolence. All our prayer, our liturgies, our community prayer, our private meditation, everything should be making us greater nonviolent disciples of the nonviolent Jesus. Should be deepening our nonviolence. That we're constantly letting go of violence, and God is giving us the gift of peace, and we're giving God a safe place of peace to live in our hearts, so that we're moving from violent hearts to nonviolent hearts, so that the God of peace lives in us very peacefully and works through us. So we are now people of contemplative nonviolence. And I saw that one of the questions was about anger and pain. And I can talk about that more if you want, but the way that anger is forbidden in the Sermon on the Mount. So sorry to report this, because of course the psychologists tell us it's a neutral emotion and we channel our action, and Jesus says baloney. And only Gandhi is the only person I can find who decided to take Jesus seriously when he was young. Seriously. And I put it this way in my book, The Nonviolent Life. If you study carefully the Sermon on the Mount, like Gandhi did, every single word, especially in the Greek, you see that Jesus forbids two emotions in the life of nonviolence, and he recommends two emotions for the life of nonviolence. And we do everything backwards, of course, because we're violent people. He says, whatever you do, don't cultivate anger or fear. Those are our best things. And that's what the culture is breeding with this election. Instead, Jesus says, cultivate and practice grief, which is not allowed in the United States. We don't grieve. And cultivate joy, which is deeper and different than happiness or any kind of baloney that this culture offers. This is a deep, deep stuff. I think that the only way to live these days in your contemplative nonviolence is to take time once or twice a week in your private meditation or in your walks in the park where you grieve for Mother Earth and you grieve for our sisters and brothers. You actually start to practice it and let yourself cry, because then our cold hearts will break and we might become more compassionate people. That's the methodology of Jesus. But we can talk about that more if you want. Secondly, I would say we have to be students and teachers of nonviolence. Have you all really studied all the incredible books coming out about nonviolence? There's never been so much stuff in the last 10 years in all of history. And we know so much more about it now. And so much is happening. It's so hopeful in so many ways. All your churches should be doing workshops on nonviolence trainings. Check out my group, Campaign Nonviolence. They have a great couple of books, From Violence to Wholeness and Engage. Tell people to look at wagingnonviolence.org. Have you really studied Gandhi and Martin Luther King's teachings with your congregations? And this is the kind of thing. Have you studied it? And then go and teach it to everybody. And I'm talking about personally too, with your kids, with your grandkids. Third, help people, invite people to be activists. By that, I mean nonviolent activists for positive social change. Forgive my name dropping, but I was with Cesar Chavez shortly before he died, and I said to him, if I'm ever with people and they said, what should we do? What should I say? And he said, without missing a beat, Cesar Chavez went like, and he used this gesture. He said, tell everybody, John, for the rest of your life, public action, public action, public action. Everybody has to engage in some public action for justice, disarmament, and creation. So I'm just passing on the word I heard. And fourthly, I say we have to be a prophetic people. I wouldn't put on the label about prophets. You know, a prophet to me is someone who listens to, in your prayer is mainly listening, sitting in silence, waiting for the God of peace to speak, and letting the God of peace speak, and we don't do the talking. We shut up. God of peace speaks, and then we go publicly into the culture, excuse me, and we tell the culture of violence what the God of peace has to say, which is usually like, get rid of your guns, end all your wars, abolish your nuclear weapons, stop executing people, clean up the earth, and feed all the poor, and house all the poor, and create a new culture of nonviolence. Well, we don't really have to have that burden of ourselves. We have a community. You all have CHUM. I think, Deanna, your mission is to be a prophetic community in Denver. You know, together, you have power to speak the truth to all of Colorado. And that's a beautiful gift. So maybe that's an awful lot, and I'll stop right there, and I have a little cough. So I'll hand it over to Mark or Deanna.
Before we ask some questions, first of all, this is very challenging. You're right. Thanks a lot, Mark. This is very difficult.
You know, I was just talking about Jesus, Deanna. I didn't know.
Blah, blah, blah. This is very
Deanna, while you're catching your breath, can I run and get a cup of water for just a second?
No.
Be right back.
Yeah.
Don't panic and pass out. I'll be right back.
Speak among yourselves. But one of the things I wanted to say, first of all, this is very challenging. There's so many questions about how do we do this. But when he comes back, what I want to do is have him acknowledge one of the people on the screen, which is Alison. I know all of you have been involved in so many things, but Alison Satell and her husband, Peter, are being recognized this year at our CHUM Odyssey Not Having a Luncheon. John, what I wanted to mention to you is I'd like you to acknowledge a woman that's on our screen, Alison Satell.
Oh.
And also, can you wave? Alison and Peter Satell, who have for many, many, many years, you're not that old, but taken care of the earth and done so much work. And every year, CHUM has had an Odyssey Appreciation Luncheon. And this year we're having and giving an award. And Peter and Alison are getting the award this year for their care of the earth.
Oh, congratulations, Peter and Alison. That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think you have covered so many of the questions, and every time I write a question, you answer it. I asked about, Jesus in the temple throwing things around, and I think
I'd love to talk about that a little bit more if I could.
Could you? Because that's I'm unclear on how it is to be nonviolent. When you talk about Jesus being nonviolent, what does nonviolence mean? Does it mean just not taking a life? Or does it mean in how you act? I mean, Marty's in the other room. We've been married 50 years. This is a challenge. So what does nonviolent, I mean, he's still alive. Marty, I don't know if you're there somewhere waving, but he's still alive. I'm still alive. But what does this really mean practically?
I think that's the question. That's why I invited you all to try to define it. And I've really studied Gandhi and Dr. King. I went to India with Arun Gandhi. I know all Dr. King's friends. I was friends with Coretta, and I've been asking them, and they try to define nonviolence morning, noon, and night. I think you, Diana, and your husband should talk about nonviolence and where do you all need to deepen your nonviolence personally, or where do you feel a little bit of violence? And this is, Jung said all this about befriending your shadow side. I think we're addicted to violence in the culture. So in effect, the church, Deanna, is a 12-step group of Violence Anonymous. That's what this today is. And I'm your guest speaker. Hi, I'm John. I'm addicted to violence. And I tell you my sad story. And we're turning to our higher power. We're making restitution. And we're trying to become sober people of nonviolence. Only we have to do this for the whole planet, or we will destroy ourselves. This is the alcoholic can kill himself. This is very serious. I do want to talk about Jesus, but nonviolence is all of that. That's why I said there's so many definitions. You do not take a life, but you don't sit back while we're dropping bombs in Afghanistan, or while they're planning to bomb places in Colorado Springs or next door in Nevada and Los Alamos. You want to be nonviolent in your relationships, and you want to be publicly building a movement of nonviolence, and you want to be nonviolent to yourself, and everything has to change. We are just now beginning to develop a theology and spirituality of nonviolence. Maybe I've been working with the Vatican and Pope Francis. We're trying to get him to write an encyclical on nonviolence. So this is all brand new. That's why I think we have barely begun to follow the nonviolent Jesus. And to me, Gandhi took an hour of silent meditation in the morning, and he read a little bit from the Sermon on the Mount and a little bit from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. And then he did it again every night for 1 hour for 45 years. I went to the places where he did it. And he said, you can't be nonviolent without a contemplative practice. And he was a very busy guy, Deanna. He was leading a revolution. Don't say I'm too busy for that. No, he was very busy. And the pandemic is a good time to practice. See what I mean? To really go deeper with your spouse and your family and say, okay, my driving's got to be nonviolent, or my joke's got to be more nonviolent, the way I relate with some of the people, or my relationship with my spouse, whatever it is, I don't know. Or that one person at work, I got to become more nonviolent. And everybody's a little different. You got to You got to ask Jesus how to do it. You need your community help. You got to study books. But let me talk a little bit more about Jesus since you mentioned the temple, if you wouldn't mind. Now, I have a long article about the civil disobedience in the temple on my website, johndeere.org. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere there if you want to dig around for it. The other thing is I have a book, which to me is the most important book, which really explores the nonviolence of Jesus as he starts to Jerusalem, he arrives in Jerusalem, how he goes through his trial and execution with nonviolence, and then how the resurrection is all nonviolence. And I think it's totally original. And it's called Walking the Way, and you can get it on Amazon. You might like that, Diana, because there's a chapter there about it. But here's the thing. So Jesus is teaching us all these spectacular teachings of nonviolence. And then Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, very, very clearly tell the same story. Very simple story. He's in Galilee. He teaches. He organizes. He marches to Jerusalem. He confronts the system. They kill him. We know in the year 70, the Roman Empire came in and destroyed Jerusalem. That would be like if Denver was nuked. It was completely razed to the ground. Everybody was killed. So that's historical. And all the scholars say Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, were written just before or just after the destruction of Jerusalem. So Mark is probably written around 68. And Mark's gospel, there's no Sermon on the Mount in Mark. It's all, we got to resist the empire. And Matthew and Luke each have versions of the Sermon on the Mount, are probably written 2 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. Hey, you all should have listened to my teachings of nonviolence. That's why you got Jerusalem was destroyed. You can see it all framed that way. And everything is to the act of civil disobedience. The Gospel of John, Deanna, was written 50 years later. It's a completely different story. They messed the whole thing up. It's turned upside down. The civil disobedience in the temple is the beginning of the gospel. Remember? He does the healing of the miracle of the wine, water and wine in Cana. Next thing you know, he's in Jerusalem turning over the tables. And they rewrote the gospel saying, well, it would be like if the community of nonviolence, John is a community of real agape and nonviolence. They said, well, this isn't working, what our friends did. We got to rewrite the story and up the ante. And they have the Raising of Lazarus. And I wrote a whole book on that, which you should get, because the word Lazarus in the story means humanity. Humanity is dead, stuck in the tombs, and the God of life is calling humanity out of the culture of death. Roll away the stone, Lazarus come forth, unbind each other and let them go free. It's brilliant if you see it from the perspective of nonviolence. None of the Gospels make sense unless you read it from a Gandhian Kingian perspective. Okay, Deanna. The problem is in the Greek, in the one little word, in the beginning of the Gospel of John, it says Jesus took a cord of rope and got all of them to leave. So in the year 1500, El Greco comes along. Remember him, Deanna, the painter? And he has that 30-foot painting of Jesus with this 30-foot width, long evening gowns running like this, and Jesus is whipping them. And because of that, which the culture of violence loves, Jesus was whipping everybody in the temple. Well, there's no women allowed in the temple, first of all, y'all. Women are considered the property of men 2,000 years ago. So the painting is baloney. So I studied this in the Greek 30 years ago in theology school, and I asked the professor for months, what's going on here? And just to tell you, that word, the only time that word cord is used, is the only time that word is used in the entire Bible. It's not a rope. It's the temple is this massive building as big as the US Capitol, the Pentagon, the White House, the National Cathedral, Walmart, and Wall Street all in one building. like a mall. It's 5 stories tall. And the only way you horrible people can get in to worship God, because the faith said God only lives in the temple. So you have to go there once a year to give God an offering. So Jerusalem goes from 30,000 people to 150,000 people at Passover. But God, you're so horrible. You have to, you're supposed to buy a cow or a pig to get slaughtered or a lamb, but you are so poor, all you can afford are a few doves. Well, and your money is evil, so we need to change your evil money into our holy money, but that's going to cost you an extra $50. It's a total scam to see God. Your entire life savings are spent for the dove or the lamb to be sacrificed to God in the temple. You see how Jesus could be so upset about the injustice of it. And that's why he tells the woman at the well, God is spirit and truth. I mean, it's just incredibly revolutionary. But what does it say? If you want to follow John, it says, well, the temple is full of thousands of cattle and lambs and doves. How do you get tens of thousands of lambs and cattle up a 5-story building? Tell me. You have to have a lot of equipment. And you have this very obscure type of hymn, which the cattle know. It doesn't say in John that Jesus took the hemp and struck the people. In fact, it says he let them all go. So if you want to be a fundamentalist about it, Jesus is an animal rights activist. And Jesus took the hemp, and the cattle are going, oh, thank God, it's time for us to leave. And he saved all the animals' lives. He let them out. But that's only in John, written 50 years later. Go back and study Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's meticulous nonviolence. I can only say this, I actually can say this with authority because I've been arrested 85 times. Spent a year in prison. I know what it's like to do very serious anti-war actions. I'm a convicted felon. Thank you very much. And then when you've been in prison, it changes your reading of the gospel. So read the Gospel of Mark. I remember, Deanna, I had this, I was in charge of the teenagers. I had 5 parishes just down below Trinidad in northern New Mexico. And the nuns, my friend, Sister Hildegard, she says, you're doing the teenagers. I said, I'm not doing the teenagers. She said, you have to. So I go in the first day. This is the confirmation class. There's 20 kids, really tough. And I said, what do you know? And this kid said, we know everything. He was a freshman in high school. I never recovered. So I took the book, I threw it out. I gave them each a Bible. I said, we're gonna read the Gospel of Mark as it is, one sentence at a time, and I want you to tell me how much you hate it. This was a jiu-jitsu secret Jesuit way to get them in. So we get to this sentence, and this wasn't me. This kid says, in the Gospel of Mark, this is important, Diana, to understand the nonviolence of Jesus. He said, this is the stupidest sentence in the entire Bible. And he was totally right. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus arrives in Jerusalem after the Psalms, and the sentence reads, Jesus entered the temple and looked around and left the temple. Stupidest sentence in the Bible. The next sentence says, and the next morning he went in and turned over the tables of the money changers and prevented people from coming and going. And then he taught for the rest of the day massive crowds, and they were all amazed. What does that stupid sentence mean? He was casing the joint. Only if you've done active nonviolent civil disobedience and you've taught nonviolence all your life would you realize you can't. I've hammered on nuclear weapons. You can't just go and do it. I remember the first time I was arrested was for a sit-in at the Pentagon. And you have to look around because you want to be nonviolent. If you do the slightest thing violent, they're going to beat you up. Jesus was so nonviolent. He turned over the tables, which is totally fine in my book. And he did a sit-in, and it lasted for 5 minutes. He got their attention, and then he taught them the Sermon on the Mount the rest of the day. He doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any nuclear bombs. But this guy is not passive. It's public, active, confrontative nonviolence. And that's what's so challenging to us. And that's the level of Martin and Gandhi Ji and all of our heroes, Americans, and that's what I want to invite us to up our game and not to be afraid. Now, those books in the article I gave you, Deanna, go into the chapter and verses of what I'm trying to say. And I explain further there that, you know, when he's arrested and he's crucified, Jesus is totally nonviolent. In the resurrection, he's totally nonviolent. And you can't say things like offer no violent resistance to one who does evil, love your enemies, be as compassionate as God, unless you're really, really mean it and practicing it. It's just we're so shocked. And we're like, oh, how could he turn over the tables? Well, I hammered on a nuclear weapon. You know, Thomas Aquinas says property is that which is proper to human life. Well, I continue, Diana. You're getting to my point. Anyway, I thought you'd laugh at that, but I'm sorry I go on and on, but that was a big question. Okay. Okay, now you can talk, Mark. I'll be quiet. Or Deanna.
Yes. Go ahead, Deanna.
Well, I was just going to say, it seems in so much of this, in some way, it's against our survival instinct. Even though what you're teaching it is our survival instinct. The only way for us to survive is to be nonviolent. I hear you saying that, but somehow it feels like we're born with this other instinct to fight.
No, that's not what I said, Deanna.
No, I'm not saying you said that.
That's not what I said.
No, I'm not saying you said that.
The survival instinct.
No, you didn't say that.
I got to interrupt you, but it's so important.
Okay, go.
So important. With nonviolence, with Jesus and Dr. King and Gandhi, and with the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus, Deanna, dear friends, I say this with all prayer and hope and love. You and I know that our survival is already guaranteed. It's not an issue. Ever again. We don't have to be afraid. We can be like Dr. King on the balcony. They can harass us. We can have difficulties. We can lose our jobs. We can get arrested. We could even be shot and killed. Everything is okay with Jesus now. And forgive me for interrupting, but that's so important for me. I think about that morning, noon, and night, because the question is not about courage or survival, but it's about our faith. Do we really believe in a God of peace, in the God of peace? Do we really believe in the nonviolent risen Jesus? And I'm saying, yes, you do. And let's go for it. Thank you, Dan.
No, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Mark, go for it.
We have about 15, 20 minutes. If you want to raise a question in the chat, please do that.
Yeah, we have a few questions that have come through, and
Good,
I know any of our hosts might see them. So if you have one already in your thread, feel free to bring it up. But otherwise, I'll start with what I see here.
Please do.
All right. Scrolling back, try to get through. We've had quite a few comments that have come through. I'll start with this one from Judy Pendleton. John, how does your vision of nonviolence relate to abortion?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was there another question out there?
Yes, there are more.
We don't have any more time. Well, so for me, and this is where I'm at, we're talking about an extraordinary vision of nonviolence, which we don't even comprehend. It is so big and bold and beyond our comprehension. And that means that God is nonviolent through and through. Do we even worship a God of nonviolence? Therefore, to be human, to be fully human, is to be nonviolent. That's what I believe. And therefore, none of us are fully human. We're all becoming, that process theology and philosophy and stuff. And that's what resurrection is about. And I liked how, for me, it's, and I'm a Catholic priest, so I'm coming from the consistent ethic of life, a consistent vision of nonviolence, which says no violence allowed. So that means no war, no racism, no executions, no torture, no nuclear weapons. Oh my God. No destruction of the earth. You can't eat meat. You have to be a total vegetarian. We're talking total violence. And no sexism. I think all of us white people have to repent from the mortal sin of racism. And all us men have to repent of the mortal sin of sexism and patriarchy. It's through and through. But then, you know, to me, I can't see how abortion is not nonviolent. I don't how it is nonviolent. To me, it seems part of as the Catholic Church teaches violence. But that's me, because I know I'm a friend of Bill Clinton, so forgive my name dropping. He talks about abortion being legal, but very, very rare if we were ending poverty, if we were just towards women, and you could go on and on. The whole culture, what would happen if we didn't have nuclear weapons? If we didn't destroy the earth? If we didn't wage war? And we had trillions of dollars at our disposal. Not only would we feed everybody would have a house, we would educate every human being in the life and methodology and practice of nonviolence as a way of life and nonviolent conflict resolution. I just think the world would be so, so different. So I think the so-called pro-life movement is a mess, is a disaster, because most of those folk are for executing people. Trump has revived the federal execution and doing nothing about nuclear weapons. So I could go on. So I would have a different way of talking about a consistent ethic of life. Most of my friends in the peace movement are very much pro-choice or for abortion. And I'm open to dialogue about this and trying to figure out what is the nonviolent path. And that's why I keep saying defining nonviolence. And I think everybody on all ends of the spectrums need to really work on nonviolence and define it. This is where I'm at with it. And I nonviolently invite you to reflect what does it mean for you? And I think we can go beyond our imaginations. That's what's so hopeful and exciting about this. So I hope that's okay, my reflection. Thank you,
Thank you, John. Yeah, thank you. I'll have two things here. One is just highlight an invitation that Benita Bach has put into the chat, which is Together Colorado's requesting clergy to wear the garb and be a poll watcher to help promote a sense of peace at the polls. And there's a email that you can use to sign up if you'd like to be involved. And then maybe, John, you can perhaps comment on this reflection from Larry. He writes, we are addicted to fixing the world. The question of how distracts us from the most important question. Who are we? Who am I? Nonviolence comes from who are you?
Wow, Larry, wherever you are.
He's in Hawaii.
Well, he's not allowed to be on this Zoom thing. That's not fair. Why does he get to be in Hawaii? Is he stuck there for 6 months? He didn't get the flight back?
No, he has moved there now. So
I think you should get him off this Zoom with that question. To me, Larry, that actually is the question. I'm so glad you asked it. And that's just wonderful. And I really love that. And it's been the question for my whole life, actually. And it's the beginning of this book. Who are we? And you'll be glad to know, Larry, I figured it out. I know I'm being obnoxious here, but I'm just trying to make you laugh. So, okay, what happened to me was I got involved. I entered the Jesuits when I was 20 and early 80s. And my question was, who are we? And I didn't know who I was. And I thought the culture of war and systemic violence is always telling us who we are, and we all go along right with it. You're a teacher, you're an activist, you're a community organizer. No, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, you're a liberal or a conservative. No, you're a good American. That's who you are. You want to be all you can be? Does anybody remember that phrase? The brilliant media campaign of the Pentagon in 1970s had a commercial that ran for 10 years. Be all you can be. Join the Marines and kill for America. That's the highest level of your identity, is to kill for your culture. It's critical, and that was brilliant because it works. I want to be all I can be. And I entered the Jesuits, and when you do, they brainwash you, and they put you on a silent 30-day retreat called the Spiritual Exerciser. And there I realized for the first time in my life, Jesus comes along and says, no, that's not who you are. My question was, how, if Gandhi was right, how is it Jesus practiced perfect nonviolence? I think he did. He was totally nonviolent. How did he do it? And I was thinking, and then I realized he discovered who he was. And then he told us who we are. So it all began by the River Jordan, where he's praying, and then Luke says the heavens opened, and the voice says, you are my beloved son, with you I'm well pleased. And I think the God of peace says that to every human being on the planet. And Jesus is the only one who said yes. I don't know if that's a little over the top, Deanna, but it sure looks that way. He said, okay, I will be the beloved son of this lovely, beloved God of peace, which means I'm totally nonviolent. And he goes into the wilderness for 40 days. And the temptation is to be tempted to violence. The three temptations of violence: despair, doubt. You doubt God, so that leads to kill yourselves. Or despair is turn these stones into bread, which, by the way, would be a good thing for activists. We could end world hunger. That's not human, you see, it's despair. And domination, rule the whole world. All of those are forms of violence. Jesus is totally nonviolent. He goes forth and he says, the kingdom of God, a world of total nonviolence, is at hand. And then he's teaching the disciples in the Sermon on the Mount. I'm laughing because I wouldn't do this. I don't know. This is the way I think. If I were the savior of the world, I would be sitting here saying to you, excuse me, do you realize who you're speaking with? I am the most beloved of heaven. Show me some respect. Jesus isn't like that at all. That's what's so spectacular about him. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. You all are the beloved sons and daughters of the God of peace. And that changed my life when I really began to stay with those words in 1982. You mean to tell me I am the son of God? Thank you very much. I'd like some respect here. It's not like that at all. Everybody is the beloved son and daughter of the God of peace. Jesus is so generous. He gives it to everybody. He gives it all away. That's why I was joking. I wouldn't do that. This is really good stuff. And if you say, no, I could never do that, you're off the hook. That's baloney. That's false spirituality, by the way. That's a false humility. That's your ego, actually. This is my friend Henry Nouwen. I used to talk to him about this. He spent his whole life saying, he told me this, people are so sick, John, I can't do what you're trying to do. I can only tell them God loves them, that they're beloved. You're trying to go beyond that. And I'm still trying to go beyond that. And I told Henry he was wrong, by the way. You'll be glad to know. Somebody had to tell Henry Nouwen. But anyway, so what does this mean? Every one of us is the beloved son and daughter of the God of peace. That means every human being is your beloved sister and brother. This is the spirituality of nonviolence. That's why, Larry, I define violence as forgetting who you are. If I came at you, Larry, with a knife and stabbed you in the chest, you go, you're being violent to me. But if you're having open heart surgery, you might go, well, is that surgeon being, yeah, he's being violent to me, but he's helping me. That's why when I was a kid, I defined it that way, because I thought there's something deeper. The minute I forget that I am the beloved son of the God of peace, and therefore a nonviolent follower of Jesus, then I forget that you all are my beloved sisters and brothers. And the next thing you know, the children of Afghanistan, where I've been, are not human beings. They're them. they're the enemy, we can bomb them and kill them. You see what I mean? Nonviolence means remembering and recalling every day, every hour, who we are called to be, and therefore how we are to live in the world. Total one with everyone. It's fantastic stuff, you all. And that's why I find this more provocative to use the words nonviolence than love and peace. But of course, I'm talking about universal love, universal compassionate, total nonviolence, infinite peace. And that's why the question of identity is critical. It really is critical. And it's still happening all the time. And you see it in the political campaigns on both sides. You and I are saying our identity is something much deeper. We are the children of God, and we are citizens of the kingdom of God. Now, I know the language is difficult. Citizens of a whole new culture of nonviolence. That's first and foremost who we are and what we're called to be, and our survival is already guaranteed. Well, that's what I think about morning, noon, and night. Larry, I could go on, but I think it would be a setback for everybody. I'm afraid I may have overdone it even as I speak. So I'll give you your sign there.
Thank you, John.
Otherwise, I'll keep talking.
We have a few more questions, and one question that has kind of come up a few different ways from a few people, which is what would it look like to be gathered on the street the day after the election? And let me also read out what Jamie has written in regards to that. I've been a part of a number of conversations about how to prepare for a possible post-election coup attempt and what nonviolent resistance could look like. Trump's plan seems to hinge on seizing upon narratives of chaos, but mobilization seems also necessary. Can you talk about any tips on how to be actively mobilized in ways that don't play into the chaos narrative, especially given how little control we have over what public mobilizations end up looking like?
Wow, thank you so very much. I think we can have a lot of power and control, and we can set the stage, and we can transform any situation, even the most violent situation, into a nonviolent situation. But if we are proactive and take a lead, Deanna, I'm speaking to you here, I'm name dropping, yeah, and CHUM, all you chummies, you CHUM people out there who are so chummy, this is your big chance. You can really transform what happens in Denver. So first of all, you all got to do homework. And I mentioned too before, wagingnonviolence.org has a lot of articles and links to where groups can do. My group, campaignonviolence.org, has stuff on their website or wherever. Choose Democracy at Us. I forget the act. There might be a choose.democracy. That's George Lakey. Now, these people, these are the leading experts on the theory and methodologies of nonviolence in the streets, how to do it. They've already been laying all this out. And if you go and do that, read that stuff, you'll get some grounding. Here's what I think you need to have a meeting. If not a Zoom meeting, I mean, if you're not an in-person meeting, say Sunday afternoon, all your churches, maybe Diana could host it, can invite people, or you do another Zoom to say, here's what we're going to do. And you can have 5 points. Everybody really practice and train in nonviolence. You can even have a pledge of nonviolence. There's lots of them. Campaign Nonviolence has one on their website. Just use that. We're going to be really nonviolent. We're not going to respond with violent language. We're not going to have weapons. And second of all, you could decide, I think you should do worst case scenario, that you do need to be in the streets on Tuesday night and or Wednesday. Presume that unless nothing happens. You could say within an hour of something happened, we're all going to be at this street corner, or we're going to be in front of the Capitol, and we're going to have signs. Everybody bring a sign. We nonviolently stand for democracy, or whatever your message is. And you could be in silence. You could have a couple of peacekeepers, 3, 4, 10 people trained, maybe wearing armbands, or everybody wears white. You know, that's another thing that groups do, and then you really stand out. Or if you wear dark clothes, a white armband of some kind, and you just space and wear masks and just model a nonviolent protest. We, and have signs that say, we want our democracy and we want it to happen nonviolently now, or whatever you need to do. Some of you can do various committees, one that could work on signs and so forth. All of this needs to be organized in advance. And I think you should do it. And I think it's doable because you're already a group and you're already friends and you're right there at the Capitol. That's kind of like God saying to me, to you, hello, you all. It's just, sorry, but if you were living in Taos, I would say you're off the hook. But you're not in Taos, you're in Denver, and you chose to be in Denver, so you have the responsibility because nobody else is going to do it. None of the other churches are going to do it. If the peace movement does it, so-called peace movement, you're going to have the young kids out there throwing things and being violent to the police, and that you want to try to disarm the situation. So then you would want to have a couple of peacekeepers. If that should happen, intervene. Hey, everybody, be nonviolent. We're not doing violence here today. We're being very nonviolent. And you want to talk to the cops and say, we're being very nonviolent here. If you wanted to be really proactive, you could just plan 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. We're having a nonviolent vigil in front of the Capitol, the Denver Capitol. Only we're meticulously nonviolent. Everybody has to agree to it. And it's a nonviolent vigil. We want a nonviolent Denver and a nonviolent country and a nonviolent democracy. And we're keeping vigil for that. Something very general like that. You don't even have to get into the question of faith, but you can do that. All of these are various possibilities. I think you all might get together, at least do a Zoom and talk about some of this and have a contingency plan. Again, I hope it's not going to happen, but that it was on NPR this morning seems to say to me that it might. So I want Sonia or Mark or Deanna to respond to that, if you would. What do you think? If you're open to doing that, maybe you should say, okay, Tuesday or Sunday we're going to meet here, or whatever, Saturday or what.
Since you're asking for a response, I'll go ahead and skip down to something that came through at the bottom of our chat. And also a few people have been putting in, I've been trying to put it out, actions that groups within CHUM networks are doing and that we can all plug into. So we'll share that with our groups. And also Jamie had a follow-up because he says he's involved in a lot of the efforts that have been shared in the chat. And he says, what are some of your favorite tactics? How to channel energy in the right directions? And what does victory look like for actions like this? And I know we're at 12:30, I'll add now, which is when we promised we'd end. So if people need to go, I'd say feel free to sign off. And
but it's such a good question.
Yes, I know.
Well, so can I give my commercial is this week on Sunday, All Saints Day, I'm launching a new national organization. I've been working full-time on it for 2 months. I'm very excited about it. And I think Mark and maybe Deanna, I have sent you, you're on the list. You're going to get the general email on Sunday morning announcing it. Maybe you could send it to your friends on this group here. It's called the Beatitudes Center for the Nonviolent Jesus. And it's going to be a global organization teaching nonviolence to Christians and Catholics especially. I'm very excited about it. The website will launch on Sunday, and it's beatitudescenter.org. If people want to write it down and look at it, I'm really excited about it. Well, first
Congratulations.
of all, thank you. And pray for it. And I have no money. I'm doing this from scratch. So it's another wing and a prayer.
That's how we all do things in this group with no money.
Method. He's not big on money. The word victory is not one of my big words. I just very rarely, in fact, I think I don't use the word victory. And the word effective, which I noticed was on the flyer, is not another big word that I like. I think the word effective, it was on the flyer. Mark, with all due love and respect, that's the word the Pentagon uses.
My fault.
It was Deanna.
Thank you so much. You're in trouble now, Sonia.
I'm trying to push your buttons, but so forgive me for that. But seriously, words like we are not effective people. We are not relevant. We are not successful. and we're not victorious. And on that happy note, we are people who take up the cross as nonviolent resistance to culture of violence. So Jesus uses, especially in John, very different nonviolent feminine language. It's lovely. And that's why I wanted to mention this to you. He says, we're fruitful people. Isn't that interesting? He says it a lot. And I think this is very important. I think about it, and Dan Berg and I talked about it a lot. That's why I'm sharing this with you. Now, I love name dropping, so forgive me, but I was with Joan Baez the night that the war began in 2003, and I'm complaining to her. She's an old friend of mine, and I'm going, nothing works. I'm a failure. We didn't stop the war. It's ineffective. And, you know, she's a great hero of nonviolence. You all know Joan Baez. Without missing a beat to me, it was 2 a.m. She said to me after my long complaining for 15 minutes, Joan Baez goes, well, John, you know what Gandhi said? Who says that? And right there she had me. And she quoted Gandhi. Full effort is full victory. That's a powerful teaching. And I thought about it ever since. Full effort is full victory. What do I think is my favorite tactics? When a group gets together, like CHUM, and you all discern, what does Jesus want you to do? And then you actually go and do it. That's my favorite thing. I know I'm pushing your buttons, Deanna, but if you, any way, as Cesar Chavez says, that it's public, you're out there in the streets, you're meticulously nonviolent, the whole arsenal of nonviolence is yours. There's 1,000 things you can do. You think it should be silent because of now I was just at a Black Lives Matter protest the other day. There were 500 people. I was the only person over 25. Right. Everybody had a sign. Everybody was a couple of feet apart. Everybody had a mask. And the cops didn't know what to make of it. They were quite miffed because they were very itching to do something violent. And in fact, they had recently. This is where I live. So you just want to be, I think, really quiet, peaceful with your signs and not spreading the pandemic. But you're there making a statement for democracy and nonviolent change. And we want a new nonviolent country. No more war, no more poverty. You could have all of those things in the signs. I don't think it has to be even bigger than that, you know, and just do your training and, you know, maybe try to get a couple hundred people out there and then call the press on Tuesday. If you decide to do this, call the press, have 1, 2, 3 people as your spokespeople and have your common message down pat and emphasize your nonviolence and get out there and then make sure you reflect upon it afterwards. Do a Zoom. Depending on what happens, maybe you have to do it again Thursday or Friday. Maybe not, hopefully not. What's the follow-up going to be? Whatever, if Biden wins, you're not sitting back and going, fine, we don't have to do this anymore. In fact, you're going to redouble your efforts. Everything that we've been talking about today, we have got to push, if Biden wins, the administration to be way beyond what they can conceive that what needs to happen to stop fossil fuels. And we've got to abolish nuclear weapons and really, really get rid of racism and sexism and this greed that's just destroying us. You all know that, but I'm trying to give you a pep talk and say, this is an incredible time. The pandemic is giving you time to rest, regroup, work on your nonviolence, but we're gearing up. Someday we're going to be more involved than we've ever been. And maybe on that happy note, I can thank you for being patient and listening to me. You've been very nonviolent, all of you, but maybe that's because you were muted. I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, John.
Did we resolve everything, Mark? Has everything
Yes,
resolved?
I think we've resolved it all. It's all fixed. We do have a special closing, and I'd like to invite us to have that at this time. Sonia, if you will facilitate.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, so they will inherit the earth.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.